Tonight, somewhere in the world, a woman will give birth surrounded by machines that track her heartbeat and her baby's heartbeat at the same time. She will have painkillers if she wants them. She will have a doctor on call. But for almost the entire history of your species, none of that existed. There was no manual, no hospital, no one who truly understood what was happening inside the body. And yet humans survived it, generation after generation, in caves and huts and open fields, using nothing but instinct, memory, and each other. So how did anyone figure out how to do this safely? The real answer is far stranger than you'd expect, and it starts millions of years before the first midwife ever existed. Start with your skeleton. Your hips are narrower than they should be, not because evolution made a mistake, but because walking upright demanded it. Millions of years ago, your ancestors came down from the trees and started walking on two legs across open ground. That single change rewired almost everything below the waist. A four-legged animal can have a wide, sprawling pelvis with no penalty at all. A two-legged animal cannot. Every step you take balances your entire body weight on one leg at a time. And a wide pelvis makes that balancing act inefficient, wasting energy with every stride. So over generations, natural selection quietly narrowed the human pelvis, tucking it inward, making it stronger and more compact for the mechanics of walking. That narrow shape was perfect for walking. It was terrible for birth. At the same time, something else was happening. Your brain was getting bigger, and bigger brains need bigger heads. Over roughly 2 million years, the human brain nearly tripled in size. Every skull had to grow to hold it. So evolution handed early humans a brutal contradiction, one written directly into their bones. A narrow pelvis shaped by the demands of walking upright. A wide skull shaped by the demands of thinking. Two systems evolving under two completely different pressures, both converging on the same tight passageway. Something had to give. This is what anthropologists call the obstetrical dilemma. The term was popularized by biologist Sherwood Washburn back in the 1960s, and it explains why human birth is so much harder and so much riskier than birth in almost any other primate. Chimpanzees give birth alone, in minutes, with little difficulty. They simply reach down, catch the baby as it emerges, and continue on with their day. Humans do not have that luxury. Human birth involves rotation, a mechanical twist unique among primates. The baby's head enters the pelvic opening facing sideways because that's the widest part of the entrance. But partway down, the pelvis narrows in a different direction, so the baby has to rotate to fit through, usually ending up facing the mother's spine. Then, as it exits, it often has to rotate again. Picture threading something rigid through a passage that changes shape twice along its length. That's what every human birth requires, and no other primate needs to do it. Because of this tight fit, your babies are born early compared to other apes, at a stage when they are still almost entirely helpless. A newborn chimpanzee can cling to its mother's fur within hours. A human newborn cannot walk, cannot hold up its own head, cannot even regulate its own body temperature very well. Some researchers call this a kind of forced premature birth, because staying inside any longer would make the skull too large to fit through the birth canal at all. Your species essentially traded a longer, safer gestation for an earlier, riskier one, simply because the geometry ran out of room. Here's the strange part. This difficulty may be exactly why humans learned to help each other. Anthropologist Wenda Trevathan has spent decades studying exactly this problem. Her research proposes something now called the theory of obligate midwifery. Because human birth is so mechanically difficult, and because the baby is usually born facing away from the mother rather than toward her, a birthing woman historically could not easily reach down, catch her own baby, clear its airway, and untangle the umbilical cord all by herself. She would have to bend her body in ways that are physically awkward mid-labor, at the exact moment she has the least strength and the least room to maneuver. Not impossible, but dangerous, especially the first time, especially without warning of what to expect. Trevathan's argument is that this difficulty likely pushed early humans toward a behavior almost no other species needs, seeking assistance during birth. Not medical assistance, not instruments, just another pair of hands. A grandmother who had done this before, a sister who could hold a shoulder steady A friend who could simply say, "This is normal, keep going." In evolutionary terms, that support may have been the difference between a lineage that continued and one that didn't. Think about what that means. Long before language, before writing, before any formal knowledge of anatomy, the sheer physical difficulty of birth may have quietly shaped human social bonds. Communities that supported birthing mothers had better survival odds. Isolated ones didn't. Cooperation wasn't a nice idea, it was survival. So, how did people learn what to actually do? Mostly through repetition and observation. In small hunter gatherer societies, birth was rarely private. Older women who had already given birth multiple times became the default experts, not through training, but through experience. A woman who had survived 10 births in her community had effectively witnessed 10 natural experiments in what worked and what didn't. Which positions eased the pain? Which herbs seemed to help with bleeding? When to let the process happen slowly, and when something was dangerously wrong. This knowledge passed from woman to woman, verbally, physically, sometimes literally hand over hand, guiding a daughter's palms during her own first birth. Anthropologist Brigitte Jordan documented this pattern directly in traditional Mayan communities in the 1970s and 80s. She spent time observing how birth actually unfolded in households where no hospital, no textbook, and no formal medical training existed. What she found surprised her. Expertise in childbirth wasn't centralized in one specialist the way a modern doctor holds authority in a delivery room. Instead, it was distributed and communal. Multiple women occupied the room at once, each contributing a different piece of knowledge. One might know how to judge the pace of contractions, another might know which position eased pain, another simply provided calm reassurance at the right moment. Together, their combined judgment often outperformed what any single person could achieve alone. Jordan later expanded this idea into a broader concept she called cognition in practice. The notion that real-world expertise frequently lives not inside one expert's head, but inside a group working together in real time. Birth, in her observations, was one of the clearest examples of this pattern in all of human behavior. Knowledge wasn't stored in a book. It was stored in a group, refreshed and corrected every single time it was used. This is also why so many early birth practices across widely different cultures with no contact with each other look eerily similar. Squatting positions, seen in traditional communities from Africa to the Americas to Southeast Asia. Upright postures, sometimes supported by a partner standing behind. The use of ropes, poles, or overhead branches to hang onto during contractions. This wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't shared information passed between continents. It was physics, discovered independently, over and over again. Gravity helps. An upright or squatting position widens the pelvic outlet slightly and uses the descending weight of the baby to assist labor rather than fighting against it. Cultures separated by oceans with no possible contact arrived at nearly identical solutions because they were solving the same anatomical problem with the same set of tools: a human body, gravity, and each other. But not everything ancient midwives believed was correct. Many cultures developed elaborate rituals around childbirth, specific chants, protective charms, symbolic objects placed near the birthing space, believed to ward off evil or bad luck. Judged purely by modern medical standards, some of this looks like superstition with no real effect on the outcome. And yet, look closer, and many of these rituals seem to have had a hidden, practical function anyway. They gave a frightened woman something familiar to focus on. They gave everyone in the room a shared sense of control during an event where very little was actually controllable. This mattered physiologically, not just emotionally. Fear and tension trigger the release of stress hormones that can slow labor and increase pain. A woman who felt held, supported, and calm, even by a ritual she couldn't fully explain, may have had an easier physical labor as a direct result. In that sense, even superstition may have carried a real biological benefit, whether the people practicing it understood the mechanism or not. There's a modern twist to this story too. For decades, anthropologists accepted Washburn's obstetrical dilemma almost without challenge. It was clean, it was intuitive, and it fit the evidence well enough that few people questioned it. But more recent researchers have pushed back, and the pushback matters. Biologist Holly Dunsworth has argued the story is more complicated than a simple standoff between pelvis and brain. Her research suggests that human gestation length is also limited by metabolism, not just anatomy. Here's the idea. Pregnancy is expensive. Growing a fetus, especially a fetus with a rapidly developing brain, demands an enormous sustained supply of energy from the mother's body. Dunsworth's work suggests that a pregnant body can only sustain that kind of energy output for so long before it becomes more efficient, biologically speaking, to give birth than to keep growing a fetus inside. In her view, babies aren't born early only because the head barely fits through the pelvis. They're born early partly because the mother's body simply runs out of surplus energy to keep fueling the pregnancy at that rate. It's not just a tight squeeze at the exit, it's an energy budget quietly running out long before that. This reframes the whole story. The narrow pelvis still matters, but it's not acting alone. Two separate biological limits, one architectural and one metabolic, arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. Get this baby out earlier than almost any other primate would dare. This matters because it reframes something people often see as an ancient burden into an ancient partnership. Human birth was never a solitary act of endurance. It was built from the very architecture of your skeleton for other people to be involved. Every difficult birth in prehistory likely had a witness. Every witness likely learned something. And every generation of learning slowly accumulated into practices that, without any formal science, kept enough mothers and babies alive to produce you. Now think about a modern delivery room. Machines beeping, a doctor checking a monitor, a nurse offering water. It looks nothing like a cave or a hut or a circle of women crouched around a fire thousands of years ago. And yet the core of it hasn't changed at all. A vulnerable moment, a body doing something difficult on its own, and other people gathered close, making sure it doesn't have to happen alone. Tonight, somewhere in the world, a woman will give birth. She won't think about pelvises or obligate midwifery or obstetrical dilemmas. She'll just reach for the nearest hand. And without knowing it, she'll be doing exactly what her ancestors did 1,000,000 years ago. Not surviving birth through medicine, surviving it through each other.